Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of your Data HQ. We have Jack Blandin, VP of Data at Phi, here with us today. Jack started out his career as a full stack software engineer at Trunk Club, and after 2 years, he transitioned into data science within the same company. His next role was a senior machine learning engineer at Go Health, where he was promoted to lead and then director as the company and its data team expanded. He then led a 15% machine learning organization at Wayfair before reaching his current role as VP of Data at Phi. Thank you very much, Jack, for being here with us today.
Thanks, Anjana. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So Jack is here to give us some insights into how to build a data team from scratch and how to interview for these roles specifically from both perspectives. So before we get started with some questions, Jack, can you give us, an intro into what is your role with these interviews?
Sure. So I'm the VP of Data at Phi. Phi's, about 100 people right now. So the data team is part of the larger engineering team, which is around 20 to 25 total. The data team itself is it's 4 people. And so building out that team, I was pretty much solely responsible for interviewing. So apart from a couple of, stakeholder interviews or engineering interviews that we would do, I was doing pretty much all of the interviewing as well as interview design.
Cool, very cool. And what have you observed are, some common trends with junior level candidates?
Yeah. So this is a question I actually get asked quite often whenever I'm at meetups and stuff like that. So I think it's a great question. So I think, some common mistakes that junior candidates tend to make are related to not necessarily anything that they're doing as a mistake with respect to a question, but it's how they compose themselves and how they appear to hiring managers or even to, recruiters. So something that's common I'll see is I'll ask a question that's quite simple and open-ended, like, what are you looking for your next role? And oftentimes junior candidates will actually start to try and sell themselves a lot. Like they'll talk about their background, their expertise, and really try and double down on their skills. And I think it's, this isn't necessarily specific to data or machine learning. It's also common in software too. But it's sort of the mark of somebody who's not that confident in themselves is when they are overly trying to sell. Someone who is confident in themselves will actually just answer the question. They'll talk about what they're looking for, what their next role is, because they're confident enough in their own skill set to know that they will get that opportunity to pick and choose what they want. So I try not to use any of this as part of my decision making process. Like I don't want to penalize candidates for trying to do that. I think it's the incentive is good. However, it is very often correlated with somebody that's not maybe that's a little bit too junior for the role. Is they'll try and oversell. So I guess my recommendation to anyone interviewing is just be confident. People will pick up on that. So that's definitely something that I see common for junior data roles.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people sort of, feel like they just need to land a role, just need to, get their foot into the door somewhere, and they really oversell at that point. But really just, think of it this way, like they're interviewing you, meaning they actually need somebody with the skills, you do have it. So as long as you prove yourself to some level and also are available and willing to take up the role, they're going to hire you. Just think of it that way. They're obviously going to be interviewing other candidates as well. It may or may not be a fit, and also take it as an opportunity to assess how much of a fit they are to you and your career ambitions. For example, if you say that I'm looking for a role that would, sorry, let me just silence that. If you just say you're looking for, a role that is going to teach you a lot of things. For example, like I want to be working in with the major clouds. And this role seems like a fit for that because your tech stack aligns with what I want to work on and continue uh, developing skills. And then you just say that because it's a two-way street, and just think of it that way, right?
Yeah, definitely. Somebody who is basically at the point of the interview, the only reason that someone gets on the call with you in the first place, or gets on the call with a candidate in the first place, is because they think that you have something to offer that might be a good fit for them. So like, you don't need to oversell that. You've already done a good enough job to be considered for that call, and people are not going to make time to interview you if they don't think that there's a good chance you actually are capable. So at that point, it's really, they're looking to evaluate you. Like, are you really like a good catch? Are you, how do they, are we lucky to even be talking to you? And if you treat yourself and compose yourself that way, it can really it can really go a long way in terms of convincing the interviewers that you are very capable.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Mm-hmm.
So what about what you've observed with mid to senior level candidates?
Yeah, another good question. So I think maybe the most common, I would say, under discussed mistake that I think everyone makes, but in particular, more senior, where this becomes more relevant, I think, is when I will ask a question that has some sort of either business or end user experience sort of baked into it, even though it may be a technical question. And the candidate will sort of jump to the technical part of the question immediately and sort of like bypass the broader picture. And so I think if you think about why this happens, I think a lot of this is that, candidates are very ready to demonstrate their strong ability in the technical domain. And it's typically what they've been prepping for. They're doing coding challenges, or, they're prepping for an interview question. That's what they're like ready to do. But if I ask a question that's like, can you, let me give an example. So one of the interviews that I often give is, it's basically a very basic data science or machine learning question, even though you don't really need to use data science or machine learning to solve it. And what it asks is, given a data set, it's a cardiovascular like health data set that's available on Kaggle. And I'll ask the candidate, suppose there's an emergency room that needs to prioritize their incoming patients based on their likelihood of having a heart attack. They want to like fast track people who are likely to have one. Can you come up with sort of like a baseline strategy or something that beats their baseline strategy for admitting more patients who end up having heart attacks? And so a common thing that I'll see is people will immediately jump to, okay, let's set up a train test split. Let's start building machine learning. They sort of miss a lot of these very like subtle but important aspects to the business question, which is, for example, like I give details in the interview about how many people can you even let through like in a given time period. And if you don't consider that, then it doesn't matter how accurate your model is, it won't be productive according to the business question. The reason I ask that type of a question in interviews is because in a real business setting, that's really how questions are posed. It isn't just a pure machine learning question. It's machine learning question to solve a bigger, broader context problem. And I often see machine learning engineers and data scientists struggle to make that connection in their workplace. And so I ask it in an interview. And if I see someone sort of bypass that part in an interview, it's sort of like, it seems like that would also translate to them working, where they would sort of skip past the business context and go straight to technical discussion with technical weeds. And that's sort of a big red flag to me, and something that I see as a common mistake.
Right. And especially with mid to senior level candidates, they're often not going to be told how exactly to do something. They're just going to be told, hey, we have this problem, like figure out a solution. And that solutioning often involves, thinking about the business problem with an aerial view on like what's involved, or like what are the moving parts involved, and what are the considerations to make, what is the interoperation with the rest of the business and things like that. So yeah, I see where that, assessment comes from.
Exactly. And it's also particularly important with smaller stage companies. Like it's important with larger stage too, but the smaller you get, the more independent you have to be. And so it becomes more and more important.
Yeah. And from the interviewer's perspective, what do you think are some of the most effective assessments or mode of interviews they can follow?
Yeah, great question. I would say, I think the most informative interview that someone can conduct is a properly formatted take-home assignment.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason for that is because a take-home assignment is by and large the best representation of what the type of work someone will be doing. So, you can do a live coding interview and those are good. And I do those as well. But when you're, in a workplace, I'm not live coding with people. I'm not, that isn't how people get work done. And, when you're given an assignment or you're working on something, you have time to sort of like sit by yourself and think about it before you start on it and go about it and try some things and iterate and things like that. And take home gives you that opportunity. So I would say it's the most similar type of ask that you will get to the real like workplace. So that's one reason. Another reason is that even if you do a lot of live coding interviews, you don't really give the candidate the opportunity to provide like a well-polished output. And so what I mean by that is if you think about, what makes somebody good at their job or what is like a good employee who's contributing a lot, typically those people who are doing that well are taking a lot of time to do like the little things, for example, like documenting their code or, writing clean code. Things like that, where in a live interview, you have to move so fast that you don't have time to write documentation. You don't have time to sort of like polish it up. And so you don't really get that as an interviewer. You don't really get to see like, what is the expected work output going to be of someone like this, because really you're only testing on ability, not sort of work ethic, which is something that's equally important to ability, is work ethic. So I like the take home for those reasons. Obviously, it has some downsides. It's a lot of work for the candidate. People can cheat. I've really never had that be a problem, but it's definitely possible that people can cheat. And it can be kind of a turnoff to candidates to have to do that. So you really have to format it right. You have to make it like small enough that it's like doable, not too much effort. I like to make them fun because I don't like to have candidates do work that they really hate doing. I think there's easy ways to make it fun, like an interesting data set or something. But I really do like to take home assignments.
Awesome, that's very cool. And yeah, I agree. Sometimes it can be a turnoff, especially if candidates are interviewing for, a
Yeah.
lot of companies, and some of them are moving faster than the rest. But that being said, I do think take home is a better assessment, especially for like data roles that involve a lot of analytical thinking, as opposed to just, like memorizing some lead code questions and just regurgitating it during the interview. This is like a better assessment of like what unique analytical skills I can bring on board. So yeah, definitely a good assessment mode. And so given all of these insights, what are some unique aspects of the interviews you design?
Yeah. So I sort of alluded to it earlier, but something that I like to push on, and I encourage others to do this as well, is to rather than giving technical questions in interviews as purely technical, like embed them in some sort of bigger picture context in a way that is meaningful. And so, earlier I gave that example of the, there's that cardiovascular data set that's on Kaggle. It's usually in like the trending, so it's not hard to find at all. And you can easily just like give that to a candidate and say, here, build a machine learning model. But then if you do that, all you're testing for is straight up machine learning. Can this person build a classifier? And, anyone with any experience in machine learning can do that. And so it's like, what are you really evaluating? Are you evaluating for, deep expertise in classifiers? If so, then that's definitely not the right data set to do it, to say the least. But what I like to do is to see what is a candidate going to do in a real environment where they're not given exact instructions, and no one's holding their hand. And so that's why I always embed technical questions in some bigger picture context. It's challenging to do that from an interview design perspective. It takes more time. It takes me a full day, a full work day to write an interview, sometimes several, because you really want to make sure that the timing is right, the context is provided, they can solve it, it makes sense to everyone, it's unbiased, that people from different backgrounds or experiences aren't going to have an advantage. And so doing that well takes time, but it is also spending the time up front to construct that interview is going to save you as a manager a lot of time and headache later on, because you'll make that right hire. So I really like to embed, technical questions into business context, essentially.
Yes, that definitely makes sense. Because in the real world, unlike, clean Kaggle data sets or even semi-clean Kaggle data sets, a lot of, I think, the data professionals' work starts with collecting the data itself. And, it makes sense to actually include more stages in the process, as in the process of thinking of the question or the solution to a problem, and thinking what would be the data points you would collect, how much would you need, and what are some things you have to notice for this problem. And rather than just start with a clean data set and build a model, which anyone can do if they've just attended a data science bootcamp, right?
Exactly. Yep.
And what are some things you would consider to be red flags when people are interviewing from both sides, from both the candidate as well as the interviewer?
Yeah, good question. So let's start with the candidate side, actually. So as a candidate, whenever I see an interviewer ask very, very specific questions that are clearly they're basically asking how well I can solve the problems that they currently have. So, interviewers tend to, the reason they're hiring is because they're looking to solve some sort of problem. They're looking to build something, they're looking for more experience on something. And so when they think about, okay, how are we going to interview? We should interview for that problem we want them to solve. But sometimes they kind of overextend into asking questions around maybe they're having trouble that day with troubleshooting Snowflake or something. Maybe they just cannot figure out, this is new to them, they just migrated and they can't get it. And so in their interview that day, they start asking questions about this person's Snowflake experience. And they are likely over-indexing on the sort of today problem. And whenever I see something that is an indicator of that as a candidate, that raises a red flag to me, because I can tell that this is either not a very experienced hiring manager, or someone who's going to make short-term mistakes, basically. They don't see the big picture, and so they try and solve the short-term problems, and they're not thinking about the big picture. So when you're hiring, you don't want to interview or hire for someone who's going to solve your problems today. You want to hire someone who's going to solve your problems 6 months or a year from now, because they're not going to start for another month anyway. They're not going to get up to speed for another 2 to 3 months. By the time they're actually productive, it'll be 3 to 4 months down the road. And then even then, you want them to be there for several years. And so you want them to be solving problems then, not right now. And so I try and figure out, how is this person evaluating me? And does that align with a good business leader or tech leader? So from a candidate perspective, that's what I look for. It can be things like, what is a very specific technical ask. It can be, they pose a specific problem that their business has right at that moment and ask you to solve it. Those to me are maybe not hard red flags, but soft red flags. From a hiring manager perspective, some red flags that I see are specifically for managers, when I'm interviewing somebody to be a manager, and they tell me that they want to be more hands-off from coding. That is a major red flag to me, for a number of reasons. But I think, first and foremost, it's because basically what it tells me is that they are not competent in their abilities anymore. Because anyone that's a manager in a tech role, the reason that you even got into tech in the first place is because you were interested in it, right? You don't become a data scientist because you don't like machine learning or data analysis. That's the whole point, the whole reason you got into the field. So for someone to say, I'm not interested in doing this anymore, that is absolutely screams, I'm not competent. And so that's a major red flag to me. The good managers are people who would love to code and try to code, but just cannot find the time to do it. If that's the case for why somebody can't, actually code, that's one thing. But to choose or state in an interview that you don't want to do it, that is a big red flag to me. For non-managers, I would say another thing to consider, I don't know how many candidates actually take this seriously, but as an interviewer, I take the questions that a candidate asks me very seriously, because it's sort of like that to me is part of the interview, is the questions they ask. Did they come prepared with questions? Are the questions often reveal their level of professional maturity? If somebody's just asking me questions about our tech stack and that's all they ask about, it's sort of like, are you really thinking about your long-term career or your next role if all you care about is the tech stack? They should be asking informed questions like, who am I going to be working with? What does that look like? What types of projects? Think carefully about questions. It would be a recommendation I would have to candidates, because it is probably being evaluated by the interviewer.
Cool, got it. So yeah, those were the red flags. And what are some green flags you would like to see from candidates during an interview?
Yeah, so let me talk maybe about, I won't say that every interviewer loves this, but this is, for me personally, I love this. I love when a candidate says something to the effect of either, I'm not sure, I don't know, or can you help me with this? I love that in an interview, because when I'm working with someone, I want somebody who is comfortable speaking up when they don't know something and is willing to ask for help. Right, I can work with that. I can work with somebody who's junior and is very hungry to learn and is comfortable asking. What I can't work with is somebody who is going to try and cover up their weaknesses and pretend like they're good at something, so that when I give them an assignment and it comes back and it's not done right, that's a problem, right? I'd rather not give someone the assignment in the first place and give them something that they pretend like they can do. So for me, I love when I see that somebody is comfortable in their own abilities to say something like, I don't know, or I'm not sure. That being said, there are others who don't feel that way, but I think it's the wrong perspective to take from a hiring standpoint. I think we should all be very open and transparent about abilities.
Cool. That's very awesome. These are very great insights, and I think everything we spoke about in this podcast was all about healthy interviewing practices for both sides, and how to efficiently find your fit in the data world. So it was great talking to you, Jack. Thank you
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me, Sanjana.
Of course. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.